Do you know the story of the Mexican saint who, in the midst of persecution, never ceased to bring the Eucharist to his people? Saint Toribio Romo Gonzalez, a young priest with a burning heart and a brave soul, lived at a time when professing the Catholic faith in Mexico meant risking one's own life. His story is a testimony of unconditional love for Christ and his people, one that continues to inspire millions of the faithful to this day. Chapter 1. From Poverty to Vocation. In the humble streets of Santa Ana de Guadalupe, Mexico, the year 1900 marked the birth of one who would become one of the most beloved saints of the Mexican people. The first rays of the sun found little Toribio working alongside his father in the fields, where sweat and hard work were the daily bread for his family. Calloused hands and a sun-weathered face did not stop young Toribio from looking up to the sky as he worked. In his heart, a flame burned intensely, the desire to serve God as a priest. This vocation, however, would face its first test in the resistance of his own parents, who saw in his strong arms the necessary support for the family. On Sundays, after Mass, Toribio would remain watching the priest at the altar. His eyes shone with a determination that went beyond his tender age. For him, there was no greater treasure than bringing souls closer to God through the sacraments. At the age of 12, an age when many children of his condition resigned themselves to follow in their parents' footsteps in the field, Toribio made a decision that would change his life forever. With a heart full of hope and empty pockets, he presented himself at the gates of the minor seminary in San Juan de los Lagos. The path that opened before him was filled with obstacles: the material poverty that prevented him from buying books, the distance from his family, and the doubts that sometimes assailed his heart. Yet, God had already placed in his path who would be his greatest support: his sister Maria, whose faith and fraternal love would overcome every barrier. Chapter 2. The Sacrifice of a Sister. Maria Romo Gonzalez was no ordinary woman. In an era when women had few opportunities, she demonstrated that fraternal love can move mountains. Every morning, before dawn, she took her brother's place in the fields, allowing Toribio's dream of becoming a priest to flourish. Maria's delicate hands soon became rough from hard work. While others questioned why a woman would sacrifice so much for her brother's dream, she held in her heart the certainty that God had a special plan for Toribio. Her long work days were accompanied by silent prayers for her younger brother's vocation. The money Maria earned was not much, but every cent was carefully saved for Toribio's studies. Often she even deprived herself of necessities in order to send him a little extra to the seminary. Her sacrifice went beyond material concerns. It was an offering of pure love that God looked upon with special favor. In the letters they exchanged, Maria always found words of encouragement for her brother. "God will provide," she wrote, when difficulties seemed insurmountable. And indeed, through her hard-working hands, providence never failed. The bond between the siblings grew stronger during those formative years. Maria was not only the material provider, but also a spiritual pillar in Toribio's vocation. Her example of sacrifice and commitment would be a lesson that the future saint would carry in his heart throughout his priestly ministry. Chapter 3. The Early Years of Ministry. The day of his priestly ordination marked not only the fulfillment of a personal dream, but also the beginning of a mission that would transform countless lives. The young father Toribio, with a heart overflowing with joy, knelt before the altar to receive the laying on of hands that would make him a priest of Christ. His first pastoral assignments quickly revealed the special charisma of the new priest. With tireless energy, Father Toribio organized Catholic action in every parish he was assigned to. His primary concern was always the children. He saw in their innocent faces the future of the Church, and devoted long hours to teaching them the catechism in a creative and approachable way. The poor found in him not only a shepherd, but a true father. His own experience of poverty had taught him to understand the deepest needs of his flock. It was not uncommon to see him sharing his scant food with those in need, or visiting the sick in the remotest corners of the parish, regardless of the hour or the weather. Among his priorities was also support for workers. Familiar with the value of honest work from his own family background, Father Toribio became a defender of labor rights, always guided by the Church's social doctrine. He organized meetings where both the material and spiritual needs of workers were discussed. Father Toribio's day began before dawn with the celebration of Holy Mass and ended late at night after attending to the many needs of his parishioners. His example of total dedication inspired all who knew him, and soon his reputation for holiness began to spread beyond the limits of his parish. Before continuing, we want to warmly greet all our brothers watching from Mexico. We know that Saint Toribio Romo holds a very special place in your hearts and in the lives of your families. Therefore, we would like to ask, do you know of any family story from the Cristero era or any special testimony related to Saint Toribio? We invite you to share your experiences in the comments. Every testimony helps to keep the memory of this great Mexican saint alive and strengthens our faith as a community. And if you have any special intention, any prayer you wish to entrust to Saint Toribio's intercession, you can also leave it in the comments. Together, as a community of faith, we will unite in prayer for all the shared intentions, knowing that Saint Toribio, who was always near those who suffered the most, continues to intercede for us from heaven. Chapter 4. Times of Persecution. September 1927 marked a dramatic turning point in Father Toribio's life. The Mexican government, in its anti-clerical campaign, issued restrictive orders that severely limited the exercise of the priestly ministry. The prohibition on praying the rosary in public and celebrating Mass openly was only the beginning of a persecution that would test the faith of all Mexican Catholics. In the midst of the storm that was breaking out, Father Toribio was appointed parish priest of Tequila, an assignment that would require all his cunning and courage. The hunt for priests ordered by General Calles forced him to become an incognito father. His days of public ministry had ended, but his commitment to his flock only grew stronger. Eucharistic celebrations were moved to secret locations. Abandoned barns, remote caves, and private homes became improvised chapels. Father Toribio developed an elaborate communication system with his parishioners to inform them of the locations and times of clandestine masses, always staying one step ahead of the authorities. Baptisms, confessions, and weddings continued, but now under the cover of night. Father Toribio moved like a shadow among his faithful, bringing the sacraments and spiritual comfort despite the constant danger. His courage inspired Catholics to keep their faith alive in times of trial. Each day brought new challenges and dangers, but also extraordinary manifestations of divine providence. The faithful organized themselves to protect their pastor, creating a network of safe houses and alert systems. The persecution, far from weakening faith, only strengthened the bonds between the pastor and his flock. Chapter 5. Eucharistic Love. The Eucharist was the center and heart of Father Toribio's life. His daily prayer, "Do not let me go a single day without the Eucharist," revealed the depth of his love for the most holy sacrament. This love was especially evident in the long hours he spent in adoration, even during the most dangerous times of the persecution. During periods of clandestinity, Father Toribio took extraordinary precautions to ensure that the most holy sacrament was protected. He improvised shrines in secret locations, making sure that the real presence of Christ was never neglected. His parishioners recalled how, even in the middle of the night, they could find him kneeling in prayer before the Most Holy. The celebration of Holy Mass was, for him, the most sacred moment of the day. Despite the constant danger, he never ceased to celebrate it with the utmost reverence and devotion. Witnesses recalled how his face transformed during the consecration, reflecting a deep union with Christ present in the Eucharist. His Eucharistic love was also evident in his zeal to bring communion to the sick and elderly. Risking his life, he traversed mountains and valleys with the most holy sacrament hidden among his clothes, so that no one would be deprived of the comfort of receiving Christ sacramentally. In his teachings, he constantly reminded his parishioners that the Eucharist was the source of all spiritual strength. He explained that in times of persecution, it was precisely this sacrament that would give them the courage and grace necessary to remain faithful. Chapter 6. The Three United Siblings. In December 1927, a special gift arrived for Father Toribio. His brother Roman was ordained a priest and assigned as his assistant parish priest. This event marked the beginning of an extraordinary family collaboration in serving God, as their sister Maria, who had been fundamental in their vocations, also joined them. The three siblings established their headquarters in an old abandoned tequila factory. This place, seemingly insignificant, became a center of sacramental life and catechesis. Maria, with her experience and dedication, was in charge of organizing catechism classes and preparing children for their first communion. The presence of the three siblings created a unique dynamic in their clandestine ministry. While Fathers Toribio and Roman alternated celebrating masses and administering the sacraments, Maria acted as a sentinel and coordinator, maintaining a network of communication with the faithful and keeping watch for the authorities. In this environment of constant danger, the most moving moments were the celebrations of First Communion. During one of these ceremonies, Father Toribio uttered words that revealed the depth of his devotion. "Jesus, would you accept my blood for peace in Mexico?" The union of the three siblings not only strengthened their ministry, but also provided mutual comfort and support in the most difficult times. Their example of fraternal love and dedication to the service of God inspired everyone who knew them, showing how a family united in faith could face any adversity. Chapter 7. Life in the Shadows. The personal writings of Father Toribio reveal the harshness of his life as a persecuted priest. In his own words, he documented the 10 occasions on which he had to flee precipitously from his pursuers, each escape a different test of faith and endurance. Some of these escapes led him to extreme situations. On one occasion, he spent 4 entire days in a narrow, foul-smelling ditch where there was barely enough room to move. Darkness and confinement became his companions, while his heart remained steadfast in prayer and trust in God. The mountains became his frequent refuge, where he spent up to 8 days exposed to all kinds of weather. The scorching sun of day gave way to freezing nights, and the storms soaked him mercilessly. On one particular occasion, one rain after another prevented him from drying off for 10 consecutive days. Despite these extreme conditions, Father Toribio never lost his pastoral spirit. Even during these moments of escape, if any faithful person was in need of a sacrament, he would not hesitate to risk his own safety to fulfill his priestly duty. Each hideout became an improvised chapel where Christ made his presence known. His writings reveal not only the physical hardships, but also his deep inner life. In the midst of persecution, his words overflowed with unwavering trust in divine providence and a serene acceptance of his destiny, whatever it might be. Chapter 8. The Tireless Shepherd. Despite the persecution, Father Toribio's ministry was not limited to mere survival. He developed an ingenious system to continue his pastoral work, using a network of reliable messengers to transmit information about safe locations for liturgical celebrations. The faithful's homes transformed into centers of clandestine catechesis. Father Toribio prepared simple but effective materials so that parents could teach the faith to their children. His pastoral creativity was evident in the way he adapted the Church's teachings to the extraordinary circumstances they were living through. During this period, his ministry became especially significant for the youth. He taught them how to keep their faith alive in times of persecution, inspiring them with examples from the early Christians who had also faced similar challenges. The administration of the sacraments took on a heroic character. Baptisms were performed in the quiet of the night, confessions in remote locations, and weddings were celebrated with minimal witnesses, but with a profound awareness of God's presence. His impact on the community was so deep that even decades later, the elderly recalled with emotion how Father Toribio had kept their faith alive during those dark times. His example inspired many to remain steadfast in their beliefs, no matter the cost. Chapter 9. The Final Morning. The early hours of February 25, 1928, dawned with an eerie silence. Father Toribio rested in his humble room, regaining strength after several days of intense clandestine ministry. The clock barely struck 5 in the morning when the destiny he had long accepted in his heart began to unfold. The sounds of boots and weapons abruptly shattered the quiet of dawn. An armed group, led by a local landowner who knew the area well, had located the priest's hiding place. The tension in the air was palpable as the men stealthily approached the room where Father Toribio slept. At that crucial moment, the priest maintained the serenity that had characterized him throughout the persecution. His face, abruptly awakened, showed no fear but a peace that disconcerted his captors. The landowner, pointing at him with disdain, uttered the fateful words, "This is the priest." The following minutes passed as if in slow motion. Father Toribio, aware that his time had come, maintained a dignity that even impressed his executioners. There were no pleas or attempts to escape. His demeanor was that of someone who had long accepted the possibility of martyrdom. The morning air filled with the echo of gunshots. The first shot did not bring him down. With a strength that seemed supernatural, Father Toribio rose, taking unsteady steps as if to embrace his destiny. It was the second shot that finally brought him into the arms of his sister Maria, who would become a privileged witness to his martyrdom. Chapter 10. The Final Testimony. The last moments of Father Toribio were a living testimony to the faith he preached. As life slipped away from his body, his eyes remained fixed on the sky, as if already beholding the glory that awaited him. His sister Maria, holding him in her arms, became the voice of his final testimony. With extraordinary courage, Maria transformed what could have been a moment of terror into a proclamation of faith. Her words, "Courage, Father Toribio, merciful Christ, receive him, long live Christ the King," resounded with such force that even the executioners were struck by her determination. Father Toribio's martyrdom became a moment of paradoxical victory. While his assassins believed they were silencing an enemy, in truth they were witnessing the birth of a saint. The blood shed in that humble room would become the seed of faith for future generations. Those who witnessed the event would later remember the expression of peace that remained on the martyr's face. There was no sign of hatred or resentment towards his executioners. His death was the final seal on a life completely devoted to the service of God and his people. Chapter 11. The People's Veneration. The martyr's body was carried to the town square by his executioners, who intended to expose him to public scorn. However, the plans of the persecutors were thwarted by the immediate and determined reaction of the faithful, who turned the attempt at humiliation into a moment of profound veneration. The parishioners, overcoming the fear of reprisals, organized themselves to recover the body of their beloved shepherd. What followed was an extraordinary event. The funeral transformed into a spontaneous manifestation of faith. Instead of hiding, people took to the streets to honor one they already considered a holy martyr. The funeral ceremony, held the following day, became what many called a popular canonization. Thousands of people from nearby towns gathered to bid farewell to their pastor. Songs and prayers blended with testimonies from those who had been touched by his ministry. During the funeral, numerous faithful shared stories of how Father Toribio had helped them during the persecution. Some recounted how he had risked his life to bring the sacraments, while others remembered his words of encouragement in difficult moments. Each testimony confirmed the holiness of his life and the heroism of his death. The burial itself became an act of peaceful defiance against religious persecution. Rather than dispersing in fear, the faithful remained united in prayer, convinced that they now had a new intercessor in heaven who understood their suffering and needs. Chapter 12. The miracles begin. The first supernatural signs were not long in appearing. Shortly after Father Toribio's martyrdom, reports of extraordinary events began to emerge around his tomb. People who went to pray before his mortal remains experienced surprising answers to their prayers. Cancer patients were the first to experience his powerful intercession. Medically inexplicable recoveries began to be documented. Doctors were perplexed by the sudden recoveries of patients who had invoked the martyr's help. Women longing for motherhood found in him a special intercessor. Many couples who had lost hope of conceiving began to receive the gift of life after turning to his intercession. These miracles of fertility multiplied, establishing a particular devotion among hopeful mothers. Surprisingly, migrants began to report extraordinary experiences of protection during their dangerous journeys. Stories of appearances and mysterious assistance multiplied among those crossing borders, establishing a special connection between the saint and those seeking a better life. The popular devotion grew in an organic and spontaneous manner. No organized campaign was needed to promote his cult. The testimonies of the faithful were passed on by word of mouth, drawing more and more people to seek his intercession. Each miracle confirmed what the people already knew in their hearts. They had a new saint in heaven. Chapter 13. The Saint of Migrants. An extraordinary phenomenon began to manifest among the migrants crossing the border between Mexico and the United States. Numerous testimonies spoke of a young priest who appeared at the most critical moments of their journey, offering help and protection when all seemed lost. The stories shared common elements. A young man, simply dressed, speaking with a Mexican accent, who appeared in the most dangerous moments of the journey. Many did not realize it was Saint Toribio until, once safe, they saw his image in a church or on a devotional card and recognized him as their mysterious protector. Devotion spread rapidly on both sides of the border. Chapels dedicated to Saint Toribio became reference points for migrants who would ask for his protection before embarking on their journey or give thanks for arriving safely at their destination. What made this devotion unique was the way it transcended physical and cultural borders. Saint Toribio became a spiritual bridge between two nations, reminding everyone that holiness and compassion know no geographical limits. His own experience of clandestine life during the persecution made him especially close to those living in the shadows. The Mexican press coined the term Toribio mania to describe the phenomenon of the massive devotion that arose. Testimonies of his intercession multiplied, and people from all social classes, including public figures and celebrities, made pilgrimages to his tomb to ask for his help. Chapter 14. The Glorification. The process of officially recognizing Father Toribio's sanctity began to take shape decades after his martyrdom. In an act of profound significance, his mortal remains were transferred to his birthplace, to the chapel he had built in Jalostotitlan 20 years after his sacrifice. His beatification took place on November 22, 1992, when Pope John Paul II elevated him to the altars, along with other martyrs of religious persecution in Mexico. The ceremony was a moment of immense joy for the Mexican people, who now had official confirmation of what they had long known in their hearts. The process continued to advance, propelled by the countless testimonies of favors and miracles attributed to his intercession. His canonization, performed on May 21, 2000, was the culmination of a long journey of faith and popular devotion. Pope John Paul II, who held a special affection for the Mexican martyrs, proclaimed the sanctity of Toribio Romo before a jubilant crowd. The canonization ceremony in St. Peter's Square was a particularly emotional moment for the Mexicans present. Thousands of pilgrims, many of them migrants who had experienced the saint's intercession firsthand, filled the square with Mexican flags and portraits of their beloved protector. This official recognition by the Church only confirmed what the people had already experienced, that in Saint Toribio there was a powerful intercessor, whose heroic life and death continued to inspire new generations of the faithful. Chapter 15. Pilgrimages and Shrines. The phenomenon of pilgrimages to places associated with Saint Toribio has transformed the spiritual landscape of Mexico. His hometown, Santa Ana de Guadalupe, receives up to 200 buses every weekend with pilgrims from all over. The old tequila factory where clandestine masses were held has become a shrine that attracts thousands of faithful. Pilgrims retrace the same paths he once walked during the persecution, turning these routes into true paths of faith. Celebrations in his honor have developed unique traditions in each region. Some communities organize nocturnal processions, recalling his clandestine masses, while others stage reenactments of his life and martyrdom. The shrines dedicated to him have multiplied on both sides of the Mexico-United States border, creating a network of sacred places that connect migrant communities with their spiritual roots. These pilgrimages not only keep his memory alive, but also strengthen the community and cultural ties among devotees, creating spaces for meeting and solidarity. Chapter 16. The Cristero Saints. The Cristero War, 1926-1929, produced numerous martyrs who were later canonized by the Church. Among the most prominent companions in martyrdom of Saint Toribio Romo are Saint José Isabel Flores, a priest who was tortured and executed in 1927. Before dying, he forgave his executioners and cried out, "Long live Christ the King!" His final act was to bless those who killed him. Saint Cristobal Magallanes, the spiritual leader of the group, he was shot in 1927. His final words were, "I am and I die innocent. I forgive with all my heart those responsible for my death, and I ask God that my blood serve for the peace of the Mexicans." Saint José Sanchez del Rio, a young boy of just 14 years who became one of the youngest martyrs. They cut the soles of his feet and forced him to walk to his tomb. He died shouting, "Long live Christ the King." Saint Jesus Mendez, a priest caught while bringing the Eucharist to a sick person. He asked for just a few minutes to consume the consecrated hosts before being executed. Saint Pedro de Jesus Maldonado. Although he died in 1937 after the main conflict, he was persecuted during the Cristero War. He died from head injuries while protecting the Most Holy Sacrament. The 25 Mexican martyrs canonized along with Saint Toribio on May 21, 2000, shared a remarkable similarity in their testimony of faith. All of them manifested a deep devotion to the Eucharist, which became their strength during times of persecution. They stood out for their tireless catechetical work, bringing the teaching of the faith even under the most adverse conditions. A particularly moving aspect was that following the example of Christ, they all forgave their persecutors at the moment of martyrdom. They faced death with extraordinary courage that astonished even their executioners, and most sealed their testimony with the cry that became the emblem of their faith, "Long live Christ the King." This unity in their testimony and in the way they faced martyrdom demonstrates how the Holy Spirit acted similarly in each of them, making them true witnesses of Christ during one of the most difficult moments in the history of the Church in Mexico. Chapter 17. Saint Toribio in the 21st century. Devotion to Saint Toribio Romo has evolved and adapted to contemporary challenges. In the digital age, his devotees have created prayer and support networks through social media, sharing testimonies of favors received, and organizing virtual pilgrimages during the COVID-19 pandemic. Modern parishes bearing his name have become centers of assistance for migrants, following his example of protecting the most vulnerable. These churches not only offer spiritual support, but also provide legal, medical, and humanitarian aid to those seeking a better life. Young Catholics have found in Saint Toribio a model of faith relevant to their lives. His youth at the time of his martyrdom, his dedication to catechesis, and his courage in the face of persecution especially resonate with the new generations who face their own challenges in living out the faith in an increasingly secularized world. Theological study centers and seminaries have begun to research and delve into his Eucharistic spirituality, discovering in his writings and testimonies a rich source of inspiration for current priestly formation. His example of faithfulness in times of crisis has become particularly relevant in the training of new priests. Saint Toribio's intercession continues to manifest itself in surprising ways in the modern world. Testimonies of his help now come not only from migrants crossing physical borders, but also from people confronting the borders of illness, loneliness, discrimination, and other contemporary challenges. Prayer to Saint Toribio Romo. Beloved Saint Toribio, faithful shepherd and martyr of Christ, who in the midst of persecution never abandoned your flock and kept the flame of faith alive with your heroic testimony, you who made the Eucharist the center of your life and did not let a single day pass without embracing Christ in the sacrament, teach us to live with the same hunger for the bread of life and the same thirst for the chalice of salvation. We ask you to intercede for us before the Lord, especially for the suffering sick, for couples yearning for the gift of children, and for migrants seeking a better life. Protect those who undertake dangerous journeys. Be a guide for those crossing borders, a comfort for those suffering far from home, and hope for those who feel alone and abandoned. Just as your sister Maria was the pillar of your vocation, help us to be support for those in need. Just as your brother Roman shared your ministry, teach us to serve united in faith and love. May your blood shed for Christ the King continue to bear fruit of peace and reconciliation. May your example of courage and fidelity inspire us to live our faith without fear. Saint Toribio Romo, martyr of the Eucharist, pray for us and for our families. Grant us the grace to live and die faithful to Christ, just as you did on that early February morning. That at the end of our days we may say like you, Lord, I have not let a single day pass without receiving you, and that our final breath be an act of love for Jesus in the sacrament, for whom you gave your life. Amen.